The rain didn't care about rank. It soaked the silk suits and the orange municipal uniform the same way, without mercy, without distinction. 300 people stood behind the ropes at Kong Min-jae's burial. Politicians, executives, board members, heirs. Every umbrella was black. Every expression was practiced. They had all rehearsed their grief on the drive over, adjusting their faces in the rearview mirror like men preparing for a meeting. Then, a woman in a neon orange work uniform pushed through the back line. She didn't have an invitation. She didn't belong in this circle of silk and imported perfume. Nobody moved to stop her, because nobody thought she was worth stopping. She dropped to her knees in the mud. Her hands landed flat on the cold, polished granite of the gravestone. Her knuckles turned white, and then she began to cry. Not the composed, dabbing at the corner of the eye kind. Not the kind people perform for cameras. It was a broken, private sound, the kind that only comes out when you think nobody is watching. Her shoulders shook. She pressed her forehead against the carved letters of his name, like she was trying to hold a piece of him inside the stone. The crowd shifted. Someone sneered at her uniform. She didn't even blink. 10 feet away, tucked into the shadow of a willow tree, the man whose name was carved into that stone watched her. He was supposed to be dead. He was supposed to be hunting enemies. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was there. That was the problem. Because in a cemetery full of people performing love, only one person was actually feeling it. And he had no idea why. 3 days ago, the world watched Kong Min-jae's armored car become a fireball near the Han River. The explosion happened at 11:47 p.m. on a bridge with no traffic cameras. Every news station in South Korea ran the same headline before dawn. Kong Min-jae, dead at 35. The ruthless CEO of the Kong Empire. The man the underworld called the Wolf of Seoul. Gone. Except he wasn't. The explosion was engineered down to the millimeter. The car was empty. The burn pattern was designed to be convincing, but leave nothing identifiable. Min-jae had been standing in a parking garage 3 blocks away when the fireball lit up the Han River, watching the smoke rise through a rain-streaked window. He had been planning this for 4 months. The cracks started small. Financial reports that didn't match their originals. A shipment route leaked to a rival organization. 3 of his soldiers died that night. Trusted men who began checking their phones when he entered rooms. Someone inside his empire had been bleeding it quietly, patiently, like a slow wound designed to kill before it was noticed. Min-jae had learned one truth in 15 years at the top. The most dangerous enemy is the one who still smiles at you every morning. So he built the trap himself. Staged the death. Let the silence reveal everything. Only 3 people knew the truth: his childhood bodyguard Ryu, his private physician, and his attorney. Everyone else received the same news as the public. Min-jae needed real reactions. Grief was easy to fake. Relief was not. Now he stood at his own burial, invisible. A gray maintenance coat. A low cap. The posture of a man paid to be overlooked. He scanned the crowd with a cold, methodical patience. His board members were checking their watches. One executive was already on his phone, probably calling a broker. His cousin Daesung stood at the far edge of the gathered mourners, his eyes not red from crying but sharp, scanning the crowd like a man calculating what he could reach first. A relative he had always dismissed as too obvious, too greedy, too impatient to be truly dangerous. Disappointing, Min-jae thought, but useful. The legal team would have the inheritance documents ready before the flowers wilted. He had expected that. The premature relief, the quiet deal-making behind cupped hands. This was exactly why he had staged this. Let them move. Let them show their hands. Then step out of the grave when the moment was perfect. It was all going exactly as planned. Then the atmosphere shifted. A woman in a bright neon-orange municipal uniform broke through the back edge of the gathering. She moved like someone in a trance. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just unstoppable in a quiet, grief-drunk way that made people step aside without knowing why. She dropped to her knees in the thick mud directly in front of the gravestone. She pressed her forehead against his name and wept. Min-jae went still. He knew every person on his payroll. He knew every enemy in the city. He had a file on every face in this cemetery. He had never seen her before in his life. Who is she? He didn't have an answer. And for the first time in 4 months of meticulous planning, Kong Min-jae encountered something he hadn't prepared for. The ceremony ended. The VIPs retreated to their black sedans. They passed the woman in the mud without looking down, the way people walk past a puddle. Someone muttered something under their breath. Quiet laughter followed. She didn't react. She stayed until the last car had gone. Then she slowly stood. Her legs were unsteady. She wiped the rain from her face with the back of her hand, the gesture of someone who had been crying for so long they stopped noticing it. She reached into the front pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She held it against the gravestone for a moment, both hands, both palms flat. A private ceremony, something between her and a man she believed was gone. Then she tucked it into the seam where the stone met the base, turned, and walked away into the mist without looking back. Min-jae waited until she had disappeared from sight before stepping out from the trees. He stood before his own grave for a long moment. The flowers were already starting to bend under the rain. Someone had arranged white lilies, his mother's flower, not his. A detail no one alive would have gotten wrong. He looked down at the base of the stone. The wind had already caught the paper. It lay face down in a shallow puddle, ink bleeding through the back of the page. He picked it up. He carried it back to the safe house without opening it. His hands were steady through gunfights and high-stakes negotiations. But as he sat alone under the dim lamp of the safe house kitchen and unfolded the wet paper, they were not entirely steady. Mr. Kong, I know you never saw me. That is okay. He frowned. He kept reading. But I want you to know, you saw me once when it mattered. 6 months ago, 2 men cornered me behind your building. 2 a.m. You were walking out for a phone call. You didn't look at me. You just said 2 words and they ran. You went back inside. You didn't think about it again. I have thought about it every day since. He remembered that night. He had been irritated, a deal gone sideways, a call he had to take outside to avoid the listening devices he suspected inside the building. 2 men blocking the exit. He had told them to move. A reflex. He hadn't registered the woman behind them. He hadn't registered anything. I've watched you from the street for 2 years, the letter continued. You never left before midnight. You always stood at your window during storms. You looked lonelier the more powerful you became. I hope wherever you are now, someone is finally being kind to you. Nickel. Min-jae sat in the silence of the safe house for a long time. The weight of it hit him in a way he hadn't expected. Not like a threat, not like a problem. Like something far more dangerous. Like recognition. A woman he had never noticed had understood him more precisely than anyone inside his empire. He set the letter down. Outside, half a mile away, a black sedan was idling near the cemetery gates. Inside, a man adjusted the zoom on a long-range camera lens, scanning the muddy ground near the grave, and the single wet footprint that didn't belong to any of the listed mourners. Daesung found the footage before noon. He sat behind Min-jae's desk, already on the first morning, sitting behind the desk, reviewing the private cemetery cameras his security team had pulled overnight. He scrolled without expression until the frame captured her. Orange uniform, hands on the stone, kneeling in the mud while every other mourner stood at a careful, dignified distance. He leaned forward. She left something at the grave, he said to his assistant. Find out what it was. Find out everything about her. Inside the safe house, Min-jae watched the same feed through a system Ryu had patched into the building's private network. He watched Daesung's men receive the order. Watched 2 of them pull up a municipal records database within minutes. Watched the search narrow to a woman named Nickel, foreign national, street cleaning contract, assigned to the district surrounding the Kong building for the past 2 years. His jaw tightened. He had wanted to expose a traitor. He had not wanted to put a target on a woman who had done nothing but leave a letter at a grave. But the trap had already closed around her, and she didn't know it. Nickel finished her morning shift at 7 a.m., and began the long walk home through the district she had cleaned since arriving in Seoul. She didn't vary her route. She didn't have reason to. Nothing in her life had ever required the kind of strategic awareness that changes which streets you take home. She stopped at a convenience store for a bottle of water. She read a text from her coworker. She stood under the awning for a moment watching the rain. The black car passed her twice. She noticed the second time. A slow drift, lights off, the particular unhurried movement of a vehicle with nowhere to be. Her shoulders pulled inward slightly. She kept walking. She told herself she was imagining it. From a surveillance feed inside the safe house, Min-jae watched the car follow her turn. His expression didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. "Ryu," he said, "I need a route. Every turn from the store to her building. I need it in 3 minutes." Ryu didn't ask questions. That was why Min-jae had kept him alive through 15 years of a world that killed loyal men first. Min-jae pulled on a dark coat. He memorized the route. He left without a plan, something he hadn't done in years. Plans required time. Time was what she didn't have. The streets were still slick from the morning rain. The city was between shifts, that quiet industrial hour when the people who clean Seoul are going home while the people who consume it are just waking up. Nickel turned down the side street she always used, a shortcut between 2 older buildings, always empty at this hour. The black car accelerated. Min-jae was already at the other end. He didn't have to do much. He simply stepped out of the doorway into the path of the headlights, hands in his pockets, and looked directly at the driver. The car stopped. Men who work for men like Daesung recognize authority instinctively. They don't always know why they stop, they just do. Min-jae waited until the car reversed and disappeared around the corner. Then he turned. Nickel was standing 10 feet behind him, very still, her water bottle forgotten in her hand. He reached up and pulled down the collar of his coat. He removed the cap. She stared at him. The color drained from her face. Then something else replaced it, something that wasn't fear. "You're real," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Walk with me. Right now. I'll explain everything." She looked at the empty street where the car had been. Then she looked back at him, at the face from the gravestone, alive and tired and watching her with a quiet urgency that left no room for argument. She walked. The safe house was nothing like where he lived. No guards. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han. No artwork selected by someone paid to make powerful men look cultured. Just a small apartment in an ordinary neighborhood. Dim lights, a wooden table, the smell of old coffee. The kind of place that belonged to someone who had learned not to need much. Nickel sat across from him, and he told her everything. The explosion. The betrayal. The 4 months of watching the rot spread through his empire, without being able to cut it out, without showing his hand. The staged death. The week of watching to see who celebrated. She listened without interrupting. That surprised him more than anything. The people in his world either flinched or bargained when he told them the truth. She just absorbed it, steady processing, giving him nothing back except her full attention. "Did you know they'd follow me?" she asked when he finished. "Not until last night." She nodded once. Not forgiving it, just filing it. "What do they think I know?" He told her about the night 3 weeks before his staged death. A late financial meeting in his private office. It ran past midnight. The side entrance window had been cracked open. She was on her route. She went still. "I heard voices," she said slowly. "I didn't understand most of it. I was just trying to finish my section before the rain came." She looked at her hands. "I didn't think it mattered. I'm the cleaner. Nobody thinks about what the cleaner hears." "It matters," he said. "Tell me everything you remember." She closed her eyes. Rebuilt the night from the details she had stored without knowing why. They were arguing about money. Large amounts. Words like offshore and emergency transfer. One voice was shouting. But the other one, she paused. The other one wasn't angry at all. He sounded like he was organizing a schedule. And at the end of the call, he laughed. Min-jae leaned forward. He laughed. Short. Quiet. Like a breath through the nose. She demonstrated it. Min-jae went completely still. He knew that laugh. He had heard it in boardrooms for 15 years. He had heard it at his father's funeral, at the front of the mourners, steady and composed while everyone else shook. He had heard it across late-night dinners when strategy became something close to friendship. He had heard it at his own fake funeral, 3 days ago, when Director Yoon delivered the eulogy, voice cracking, eyes wet, praising the brilliant and irreplaceable leader he had spent years quietly dismantling. That nasal, exhaled, arrogant laugh. Only one man in the Kong Empire laughed like that. Director Yoon. His father's oldest partner. The man who had guided every major acquisition, who had the access codes to every financial system, who had been trusted so completely that Min-jae had stopped watching him years ago. Which was, Min-jae understood now, exactly the plan. Dae-sung was greedy and visible, a hungry cousin circling the inheritance. He was meant to be the obvious suspect. While Min-jae spent 4 months watching Dae-sung's movements, mapping his contacts, building a case against an opportunist with no real architecture behind him, Yoon had been dismantling the empire's foundations at a level no financial audit would catch without the specific transaction codes only he possessed. Min-jae stood and walked to the window. The city lights below were cold and indifferent. He pressed his palm flat against the glass and felt the chill come through. 15 years. Dinners. Advice given at moments of weakness. Strategy refined in rooms where no one else was allowed. All of it a scaffolding designed to keep him facing the wrong direction. You trusted him, Nickel said from behind him. Not a question. A reading. Yes. More than anyone else. He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't fill the room with words the way people did when they were uncomfortable with someone else's pain. She simply stood up, walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the burner. The small, ordinary sound of water beginning to heat was the most human thing Min-jae had heard in weeks. He watched her move through the narrow kitchen. She knew where the cups were already. She had reorganized the shelf 2 days ago without being asked. She knew he took his coffee black. She didn't ask. She just made it. He sat back down. For the first time since the explosion, the pressure behind his eyes eased slightly. Not because the danger had changed. Because there was a person in the room who wasn't calculating anything. Then his phone rang. Ryu's voice was clipped. The offshore accounts spiked an hour ago. Dae-sung is moving everything, faster than we projected. He's not waiting for the board meeting. He's preparing to run. Min-jae set down the cup. How long do we have? If he reaches the private airstrip, maybe 6 hours. Min-jae looked at Nickel across the table. She had heard the call. She met his eyes and said nothing, waiting, which was, he was beginning to understand, her particular form of strength. We keep going, he said into the phone. But Yoon is the real target. Dae-sung is the distraction. Don't move on either until I say. He ended the call. The safe house was quiet again. Outside, Seoul pressed on without them, indifferent and enormous. And in the back of Min-jae's mind, a timeline was running that he hadn't told Nickel about yet. The one that had been added to the board's agenda that morning, quietly, by a man who believed the dead had no ability to object. 2 days passed inside the safe house. Outside, the city moved through its cycles, noise, rain, gray morning light, neon after dark. Inside, the hours took on a different shape. Quieter. More specific. Nickel fixed the broken latch on the window he had been ignoring since moving in. She found the problem in 10 minutes with a flathead screwdriver she located in the back of a kitchen drawer. He watched her from across the room and said nothing, but noted that she hadn't asked, hadn't announced it, had simply seen something that needed doing and done it. He spent those 2 days buried in forensic files. Financial records, transfer chains, access logs, building a case layer by layer, the way his father had taught him to build everything, from the foundation up so nothing above it could fall. Nickel moved around the edges of his work like water, finding its own level. She brought food when he forgot to eat. She learned the exact ratio of coffee he preferred without asking. She sat across from him in the evenings and read, a worn paperback she had found on the shelf, and the silence between them was the productive kind, the kind that didn't demand to be filled. On the second night, the power went out. A storm had been building since afternoon, the kind that rolled in from the Yellow Sea and reminded the city who it belonged to. When the lights cut out, they were sitting across the table from each other with files between them. In the sudden dark, neither moved immediately. "I'm not afraid of the dark," Nickel said, as if she needed to establish that. "I know," he said. A beat of silence. Outside, the thunder moved through the building like a living thing. She told him about her mother, how she had died 2 years ago, and how the grief had been so total and so immediate that staying in the country, where everything still smelled like her, had become unbearable. She had come to Seoul with a contact number and a single bag. She had found the municipal job because it paid and asked no questions. She had learned to find peace in the rhythm of a broom on a quiet street at 2 a.m., the city asking nothing of her, just needing to be clean. Min-jae listened. He didn't offer to fix it. He didn't offer money or solutions, or the particular kind of problem-solving that powerful men use to avoid sitting inside someone else's pain. "You're the first person who didn't try to solve it," she said into the dark. "Some things aren't problems," he answered. "They're just parts of us." The lights came back on. Neither of them moved for a moment. The warmth between them sat in the room like a third presence, something that had arrived without either of them inviting it and now had nowhere to go. Then Ryu stepped through the door, tablet in hand, his face carrying news that didn't require introduction. "Director Yoon filed an emergency petition with the board this morning," Ryu said quietly. "He's invoking the legal continuity clause. If the meeting proceeds as scheduled, by the end of the week, you will be formally declared dead. The empire transfers to a trustee of his appointment." The warmth in the room went cold. Min-jae stood up. "Let him try," he said. But the night wasn't finished delivering its interruptions. His phone lit up on the table. One notification. Then 4 more in rapid succession. A media channel had published blurry photographs, a man in a dark coat outside this building, and beside him, a woman in a neon orange municipal uniform. The caption read, "The dead boss lives? And who is she?" Within 20 minutes, her employer had been identified. Within 40, her name was circulating. Comment sections filled like open wounds. The cruelty was fast and specific, the kind that required no evidence, only a photograph and a narrative. Gold digger. Planted. She got close to him on purpose. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her workplace received calls. Her route was posted on 3 separate accounts. Strangers who had never been in the same room as her were explaining her motivations to each other in real time. Nickel sat at the table with her phone in both hands, reading. Her face was very still. That was the part that struck Min-jae. Not that she was crying, but that she wasn't. She had the expression of someone who had been made small before and had spent years learning how to absorb it without collapsing. That practiced endurance was somehow more painful to witness than tears would have been. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took the phone from her hands. He deleted the app. He set the device face down on the table. "Look at me," he said. She looked up. "None of that is about you," he said. His voice was low, stripped of every register of performance. "They are frightened. When a man like me chooses someone unexpected, it destabilizes a story they need to believe. That power only moves toward power. If they make you a villain, they don't have to ask why you were the only honest person at my grave." She held his gaze for a moment. Then her eyes filled, not from the cruelty of strangers, but from something else. From being correctly understood. He turned back toward his computer. His phone rang, a restricted number. Ryu's voice came through tight and quiet. "They've located the building. Daesung's team. Probably from the photo metadata." Min-jae looked at Nickel across the table. She had heard it. She didn't flinch. He had 72 hours. Less now. He worked like a man with nothing left to lose and one thing left to protect. The files were everything. 15 years of Yoon's financial architecture laid bare. Transfer chains through shell companies in 3 countries. Board votes manipulated through proxy shares Yoon had accumulated quietly over a decade. The specific transaction codes that matched the missing funds from Min-jae's empire to accounts that dissolved and reappeared under different names like something alive trying to stay hidden. And Nichols' testimony, officially recorded and certified by his attorney through a secure channel. Her account of the voice through the window, the specific laugh, the words she had absorbed without knowing their weight. It was the thread that connected the financial forensics to a living person. Without it, the case was a structure with no door. With it, there was no defense Yun could build. Ryu fed information through the night. Daesung's offshore movements were frozen through a regulatory contact Min-jae had maintained precisely for a moment like this. A debt called in without explanation, the way all real power was ultimately exercised. On the second night, Nickel found him standing at the window at 3 a.m. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She already knew, in the way she seemed to know most things about him, by watching rather than asking. "When this is over," she said from the doorway, "do you go back to everything you were before?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know who that man was anymore." She moved into the room and sat on the edge of the table. In the gray city light through the window, she looked the way she had looked at his grave, present, unguarded, carrying no performance. "That's not a bad answer," she said. "It's not an answer at all." "No," she agreed. "But it's honest. You've been honest since you stepped out of that doorway. That's more than most people manage their entire lives." He looked at her. He thought about the letter she had left at his grave. The 2 years she had spent watching a man through a window and choosing, each time, not to say anything. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood that some distances exist for good reasons. She had respected the distance. And then she had knelt in the mud and wept for him anyway. "After this ends," he said, "I don't want you to disappear." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not good at disappearing," she said finally. "I tried that once. It doesn't work." Something in the room settled. Then Ryu appeared in the doorway, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had come to end the quiet. "The board meeting is confirmed for tomorrow morning," he said. "You moved it up. He wants it finished before the regulatory inquiry reaches him." A pause. "Boss, it's time." Min-jae nodded once. He looked at Nickel. She met his eyes and held them, steady and clear, not asking him to stay, not asking him to be careful, not asking him anything at all. That steadiness was the thing he carried with him when he walked out the door. The boardroom was a chapel of certainty. Director Yoon stood at the head of the long conference table, his voice measured and authoritative, performing the administrative last rites for a man he believed was silent forever. The emergency session had been called under the continuity clause, a provision designed for emergencies, repurposed for a theft dressed in legal language. The executives sat in rows. Their faces were professionally neutral. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul moved through its morning without knowing that a 15-year conspiracy was reaching its final performance 40 stories above the street. Yoon was mid-sentence when the main doors opened. The sound was simple, the mechanical click of a handle, the low groan of expensive hinges. Unremarkable. And then the room registered what had walked through them. Kong Min-jae crossed the threshold and moved toward the center of the room. He didn't run. He didn't announce himself. He simply took up space the way men who have always owned rooms do, with a gravitational certainty that reorganizes everything around it. The silence was immediate and total. A pen dropped somewhere to the left. It hit the floor like a gunshot. Across the table, a board member stood without meaning to. Two legal counsels looked at each other with the expression of people whose entire professional framework had just become irrelevant. Daesung's face went ash-gray, his eyes moving to the exits in that fast, involuntary way that answers questions before they are asked. Yoon didn't move. He stood at the head of the table with the particular stillness of a man who had spent 50 years surviving by never letting anything show on his face. He looked at Min-jae with an expression that was almost unreadable, almost. In the precise control of it, in the microscopic tightening around his jaw, there was something that might have been recognition. I always knew this was possible. The look of a man who had built a beautiful long game and was now watching the other player set down a hand he hadn't seen coming. Min-jae walked to the table. He set down a single folder. He didn't open it immediately. 15 years, he said. The room was quiet enough that his voice carried without effort. I want to know when it started. Yoon was silent. Dae-sung wasn't. The pressure had been building in him since the door opened, and it had nowhere to go. He stood up so fast his chair scraped like a wound across the floor. I didn't design this, he did. He came to me. I was only. Sit down, Min-jae said. One phrase. Dae-sung sat. Min-jae opened the folder. The evidence was architectural. 15 years of transfers, access logs, proxy accumulations, and a recorded voice laughing quietly through a cracked window late at night. The room didn't erupt loudly, it collapsed inward. Lawyers began making calls. Executives created immediate distance from anyone implicated. Security appeared at both doors without being summoned. Ryu had arranged that. Yoon looked at the documents for a long time. Then he looked at Min-jae with an expression that carried, beneath its composure, something old and private. A man accounting for a choice he made years ago, in a room no one else had been in. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Min-jae closed the folder. I'm done here, he said. He turned and walked out through the same doors he had entered, leaving the room to its own unraveling. The rain had eased to something quieter by the time he stepped outside. Seoul looked the same as it always did, indifferent, enormous, lit up and moving without regard for what had just happened 40 stories above it. Min-jae stood on the pavement outside the Kong building for a moment and let the city air touch his face. It felt clean in the way things feel clean after a long illness. Not extraordinary, just the ordinary restored. He had his empire back. The evidence was irrefutable. The legal machinery was already in motion. And by nightfall, every network in the country would carry the story of Director Yoon's arrest. The man who had wept at the front of a staged funeral would be answering different questions before morning. Min-jae had won. He should have felt something larger. His phone buzzed. It was Ryu. Boss. A pause that lasted half a second too long. We checked the safe house. She's gone. Min-jae stopped moving. What do you mean, gone? She left while you were inside. She didn't take much. But she left something on the table. He got in the car. He drove back faster than he had allowed himself to do anything in weeks. When he pushed open the door of the safe house, it was exactly as she had left it. Surfaces cleared, the broken window latch repaired, the cups washed and stacked. The small, careful evidence of a person who cleaned up after themselves because they had spent a lifetime not expecting to be asked to stay. On the wooden table, a single piece of paper. He picked it up. Min-jae, you have your world back. That is where you belong, and I mean that without any bitterness. I am glad for it. I am glad you're alive in a way I don't have language for. But that world was never mine to be part of. You know that. I think somewhere you've known it from the beginning. Don't look for me. Spend that energy on something that costs less. Nickel. He read it twice. Then he stood in the empty apartment for a moment, holding the letter, and understood something that hit him harder than anything Yoon had done or Dae-sung had attempted. They had both come for his empire. They had tried to take his money, his name, his power. And every weapon they used had been external, something that could be fought with evidence and strategy and the cold patience he had spent 35 years building. Nickel had done none of that. She had simply left, believing, genuinely, without performance, that he was better off without her. That her presence in his life was a kindness she had no right to impose. She had removed herself to protect him from the cost of choosing her. And that was the one thing he had not prepared a defense against. He folded the letter. He put it in his coat pocket, next to the first one, the rain-stained page she had left at the grave. He walked back out the door. The real danger in this story was never Director Yoon. Yoon had wanted the empire. That was a finite, comprehensible threat, the kind Min-jae had been trained his entire life to identify and dismantle. The real danger was this, that the one person who had seen him clearly, who had mourned him honestly, who had stayed steady through weeks of fear and exposure and public cruelty, that person had walked away not because she stopped caring, but because she cared too much to believe she had earned the right to stay. Nickel had not left out of fear. She had left out of love. The quiet, self-erasing kind that asks nothing and expects nothing and removes itself the moment it thinks it has become a burden. She had watched him for 2 years from a street below. She had learned his habits, his exhaustion, his loneliness, and she had kept every observation inside herself like something private and protected, never using it, never asking for anything in return. Even now, she was protecting him. From the complication of her. From the distance between their worlds. From whatever it would cost him to choose a woman in an orange municipal uniform when the city was already writing the story. What she didn't understand, what Min-jae understood now with a clarity that felt physical, was that the distance between their worlds was the only part of any of this that had never frightened him. He had been frightened of the wrong things his entire life. Not anymore. He found her at dawn. Not because tracking her was difficult. Ryu could have had an address in 10 minutes. But Min-jae didn't use Ryu. He didn't use systems or networks or the infrastructure of power he had spent 15 years building. He walked. He went to the street below his building. The one she had swept for 2 years. The one where, at 2 a.m. 6 months ago, 2 words had changed her life without him knowing. She was there. Same route. Same uniform. The stiff bristles of the broom moving in the same deliberate rhythm against the concrete, pushing the debris of the city into neat lines. The sky was the color of old silver, the city just beginning to wake up around her. She moved through it with the quiet authority of someone who belonged to the early morning in a way that most people never would, completely present, completely unperformed. She didn't hear him approach. He stopped a few feet behind her and didn't speak. She sensed the stillness. Her hand tightened on the broom handle. She turned around slowly. When she saw him, the color rose in her face and then fell away. She looked at him the way she had looked at the grave, like she was trying to decide if what she was seeing was real. "You should be resting," she said. Her voice was steady, but the effort it took was visible at the edges. "You have everything back. You have your life." "I have my empire back," he said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at the ground. "Min-jae, you left 2 letters," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and held them both out, the rain-stained page from the gravestone and the folded note from the safe house table. "I've been carrying both of them." She looked at the papers in his hand. She didn't reach for them. "The first one," she said quietly, "I wrote for a dead man. It was safe. Dead men can't." She stopped. Started again. "It doesn't translate." "It translates exactly," he said. She shook her head. "I'm a street cleaner, Min-jae. I sweep the dirt off the city, so people like you can walk without noticing it. I'm not saying that with self-pity. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you live in a world where that gap matters in ways neither of us can simply decide to ignore." "I know what you are," he said. He stepped forward. He didn't look at the building behind him, or the empire inside it, or the city waking up around them. He looked at her. "You are the person who cried at a grave when everyone else was counting money. You are the person who fixed my window latch and made coffee and listened without trying to fix me and stayed steady when the world went loud." He paused. "You cleaned the only part of me that nobody else could reach." Silence. Then she let go of the broom. It clattered against the pavement, a clean, final sound. She didn't reach for his hand. She looked at him for one long, searching moment, the way someone looks when they are deciding whether to believe something that costs something to believe. Then she stepped forward, and he met her halfway. 1 year later, they walked beside the Han River at dusk. The same water, the same bridge silhouette against the same sky. The city behind them, enormous and indifferent and entirely unchanged, which was, Min-jae had come to understand, one of the things he loved about it. The city didn't care what you survived. It just kept moving, and it was up to you to decide what you carried into the next morning. The Kong Empire still stood. It was different now, slower in some ways, more deliberate, built on foundations he had re-examined before trusting them again. The darker architecture of it had been systematically dismantled, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in the steady, unglamorous work of choosing differently, one decision at a time. He stopped walking. Nickel looked at him. She read him the way she always had, not by asking, but by watching. He reached into his coat pocket. He held out his palm. A simple ring. No ceremony prepared. No speech rehearsed. Just the truth, which was the only thing he had ever had to offer her that was worth anything. "I attended my own funeral," he said. "You were the only honest thing there." She looked at the ring, then at him. She picked it up from his palm and slid it onto her own finger, deliberate and unhurried, the way she did everything. Then she took his hand. Her grip was firm and warm and real. The man who had faked his death to hunt for power finally understood what he had actually been looking for. They turned away from the water and walked into the city together. The long night was over.